The morning Diane Okafor came home from a 12-hour overnight shift at the hospital, she found her suitcases on the front porch. Not just one, 3 of them. The big rolling ones she'd bought for their honeymoon in Banff, the old canvas duffel from her nursing school days, and the small carry-on she used for work conferences. All of them zipped and stacked neatly by the door, like someone had taken their time, like someone had planned this. She stood in the driveway in her scrubs, her hospital badge still clipped to her chest, her feet aching from the shift. It was 6:40 in the morning. The neighborhood was quiet. Just the sound of a sprinkler 2 houses down and a dog somewhere barking at nothing. She stared at those suitcases for a long moment, her brain too exhausted to process what she was seeing. Then the front door opened. Patrick stood in the doorway wearing the gray robe she'd given him for Christmas 2 years ago. He wasn't alone. The woman behind him was young, late 20s maybe, with dark hair still messed from sleep. She was wearing one of Diane's oversized university sweatshirts, the one from Queens, the one Diane had worn in every study session, every exam week, every late-night shift prep for 15 years. "Diane," Patrick said. Just her name. Nothing else. She didn't scream. She didn't cry, not right then. She just looked at him and felt something very cold and very quiet move through her chest, like a door closing somewhere deep inside. "What is this?" she asked. "You know what it is, Patrick. I just worked 12 hours. I've been on my feet since yesterday afternoon. I need to come inside. This isn't your home anymore." He said it flatly, rehearsed almost. "I've made my decision. Everything you need is there." She looked at the woman. The woman looked away. "Who is she?" "That's not what matters right now. It matters to me." He didn't answer. He just stepped back and closed the door. Diane stood on her own front porch in the pale morning light. 3 suitcases at her feet, her hospital badge catching a glint of sun. Somewhere behind her she heard a neighbor's door open. Old Mr. Kasparov from next door, out for his morning paper, stopping when he saw her standing there. She didn't turn around. She couldn't move. She was 37 years old, a registered nurse with 12 years of experience, and she had just been locked out of her own house by a man she had put through law school. That was the thing no one knew, or almost no one. When Patrick Mercer had been a struggling law student at the University of Toronto, working 2 part-time jobs and barely making rent, it was Diane who had kept things afloat. She'd been working full-time at St. Michael's by then, picking up extra shifts, skipping vacations, transferring money into their joint account every 2 weeks without being asked. She never made him feel small about it. That wasn't who she was. She just loved him, and she believed in what they were building together, so she did what needed doing. He graduated, passed the bar, got recruited by one of the most respected corporate law firms in the city, Harlow & Vance, where he'd climbed steadily for the last 6 years, senior associate now, corner office. A salary that dwarfed hers, and she had kept working her shifts, kept coming home smelling like antiseptic, kept eating reheated dinners at 10 o'clock at night, never once thinking that was a problem. She pulled out her phone and called her colleague and closest friend Tamsin, who picked up on the second ring despite the early hour. "He locked me out," Diane said. Just that. There was a beat of silence. Then Tamsin said, "Don't move, I'm coming." While she waited, Mr. Kasparov came slowly across the yard with his coffee and stood beside her without a word. He was 73, a retired engineer, a widower who brought Diane soup whenever she worked a run of night shifts. He looked at the suitcases, he looked at the door. He said very quietly, "You want me to call someone?" "Tamsin's coming." "Not Tamsin," he said. "Someone else. Someone who can help." She didn't understand what he meant until 40 minutes later, when a black Mercedes pulled up in front of the house and a man she recognized stepped out. His name was Graham Holt. He was the managing partner at Harlow & Vance, Patrick's firm. Patrick's boss. Diane had met him twice. Once at a firm holiday party 3 years ago, where he'd shaken her hand and told her Patrick spoke very highly of her. Once at a charity gala the following spring, where he'd spent 20 minutes talking to her about the state of emergency room overcrowding in Ontario with a genuine interest she hadn't expected from a corporate lawyer. She had no idea why he was here. He crossed the driveway with a measured, unhurried stride and stopped in front of her. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, gray at the temples, the kind of calm that came from having handled serious situations for a very long time. "Mrs. Okafor," he said, "I'm sorry you're dealing with this. How did you know where I was?" He glanced briefly at Mr. Kasparov. "I got a call." She looked at the old man. Mr. Kasparov shrugged with the mild innocence of someone who absolutely knew what he'd done and was not sorry about it. "I know this is not a normal situation," Graham said, "and I want to be clear. I'm not here in any official capacity. I'm here as someone who has observed for some time now that you are owed a great deal more than you've been given." He paused. "But first, do you have somewhere safe to go today? My friend is coming." "Good. Before you go, and only if you want to, I'd like to connect you with someone. A family lawyer. Someone excellent. Someone who will make sure your interests are represented the way they should be." Tamsin arrived 20 minutes after that, and the two of them sat in her car while Diane finally let herself cry. Not the loud, broken kind, but the quiet, furious kind, where the tears come out almost sideways and your hands shake even though your voice stays steady. Tamsin held her hand and didn't say anything pointless, because Tamsin was a nurse too and nurses knew when to just be present. That evening, Diane met with the lawyer Graham had recommended. Her name was Patricia Olawell, and within 20 minutes of sitting down with her, Diane understood that Patrick had significantly miscalculated. Patricia walked her through everything. The joint mortgage they both held on the house, the financial records that would show 12 years of Diane's income flowing into their shared life, Patrick's tuition, his bar prep course, the down payment on the house, 3 years of carrying the household alone while he was underpaid at his first associate position. The paper trail was long and it was clear and it was entirely in Diane's favor. "He can't just lock you out," Patricia said. "You own half that house, we're going to make sure you get it." Patrick called her 2 days later. Diane was at Tamsin's, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and she almost didn't pick up, but she did. "I heard you hired a lawyer," he said. His voice had that tightness in it she recognized. The one he got when things weren't going according to plan. "I did. Look, I think this has gotten out of hand. I think we need to talk directly without involving." "Patrick, what? Do you remember telling me I was embarrassing you?" Silence. "At your firm party 2 years ago, you said I talked too much about work at dinner, that it made you look bad in front of the partners. Do you remember that?" More silence. "I came home from a 12-hour overnight shift and found my suitcases on the porch," she said. "I'm not interested in talking directly." She hung up. What she didn't know then, what she learned later, through Patricia, through Tamsin, through the particular way news moves through professional circles in a city like Toronto, was what had happened at Harlow and Vance in the days following that morning on the porch. Graham Holt had said nothing officially. He hadn't needed to. But certain things had come to light in the course of normal firm business. Discrepancies in billing hours, a client relationship that had been mishandled, judgment calls that looked different under scrutiny than they had before. Patrick's work had been reviewed more carefully than usual. The review had not gone well. He was not fired, but his path to partner, the thing he had been counting on, the thing he had structured his entire sense of self around, was no longer on the table. The divorce proceedings took 8 months. Diane moved through them steadily, the way she moved through a difficult shift, one task at a time, focused, not looking too far ahead. Patricia was methodical and relentless and never once let Patrick's lawyer run a play that went unchallenged. The outcome was straightforward in the end. Diane received her share of the house, enough when it sold, to put a down payment on a condo in the east end of the city that she genuinely loved. She got a fair settlement that acknowledged the years of financial contribution that Patrick had apparently assumed she'd forgotten about. She was not bitter about it exactly. She was just clear. She went back to her shifts. She ate dinner at normal hours. She called her mother in Mississauga every Sunday and let herself be fussed over in the warm, slightly exasperating way her mother had always fussed over her, and she found that she didn't mind it anymore. Tamsin threw her a small party when the divorce was finalized. Just a handful of people from the unit, Tamsin's husband, Mr. Kasparov, who brought a bottle of wine he'd been saving. It was quiet and warm and someone put on a playlist of 90s R&B and at some point Diane was laughing at something Tamsin said and she realized she hadn't laughed like that in a long time. Not guarded, not measured, just laughing. Graham Holt sent flowers to the hospital. A simple bouquet with a card that said only, "Well done." G.H. Tamsin raised an eyebrow at the card. "That's an interesting man," she said. "He's Patrick's boss, former Patrick's boss technically, and he sent you flowers." Diane looked at the flowers for a moment. They were cornflower blue and white. She didn't know the variety. "He's just decent," she said. "Sure," said Tamsin, "in the way that means I'm going to let you have that for now." 3 weeks later, Graham called and asked if she'd like to have coffee, not in a way that required anything of her. He said it clearly, that he had no expectations, that he simply found her to be someone worth knowing, that if she wasn't interested he completely understood and there would be no awkwardness. She thought about it for 2 days. Then she said yes. It was just coffee. It lasted 3 hours. They talked about emergency healthcare policy and property law, and a documentary they'd both seen on the Mackenzie River, and a bakery in Kensington Market, that neither of them had tried but both of them had meant to. She drove home afterward and sat in her car in the parking garage for a few minutes, not because she was sad, but because she wanted to hold the feeling still for a moment, this particular unfamiliar feeling of being genuinely seen by someone, not managed, not tolerated, not dimmed to a more convenient size, seen. At work, she was still the same nurse she had always been, the one the newer staff came to when they didn't know what to do, the one the charge nurses trusted with the complicated cases, The one who stayed 10 minutes late without being asked because that's just who she was. That hadn't changed. It had never needed to come from him. Patrick, she heard through occasional mutual acquaintances, was still at the firm. A different kind of presence there than before. Quieter, the woman from the porch. Her name was Jess. Someone eventually told Diane, unprompted, had moved out of the house before it sold. Whether that was Patrick's choice or hers, Diane didn't ask. She genuinely didn't need to know. There was a moment, about a year after the morning on the porch, when she was driving to work on an early December morning, and the city was dark and the streetlights were still on, and the first snow of the season was coming down in fat, lazy flakes, and she thought, I'm okay. Not as a thing she was trying to convince herself of, just as a fact, quiet and solid, like something that had always been true and had only needed the space to be recognized. She was okay. She was more than okay. She was a nurse who had put a man through law school, had carried a household on her back without complaint, had been left on a porch with 3 suitcases like she was something that could be disposed of when it was no longer convenient. And she had stood up and walked forward and built something that was entirely, uncomplicatedly hers. The city sparkled in the snow. She turned up the radio. She went to work.